Leshy, and I have the privilege of being the president of the League of Women Voters of Deschutes County. And I'm very excited to see all of these people here today and all of these names that I don't know. So it's been a fun year. We've gotten so many new members and new members that are stepping up and taking on the different challenges that the league has. And the latest one that we are in the process of doing is the childcare study. And we met the other night for the first time, and there were 5 of us in the meeting that we are going to do the childcare study to update the League of Women Voters Oregon childcare study. And 3 of the people present that night were all new members, and Annette is actually going to be the chair for it. So it's really fun to see the excitement and stuff. Kim and Jerry and I have met with the City Club, and we're going to be once again hosting the primary forums, and they will be in the end of April. And so far we are doing the commissioners, and we are only going to do races where there's competition. And so we're still narrowing that down at this time, but we're looking forward to doing that. And for those of you who were at program planning last week or the week before, I don't know, my weeks are just flying by here. It was fabulous. And I think we had record turnout for program planning in the last couple of years. So I think the Zoom meetings are working in our favor in some instances. And the other thing, we wrote a letter to the source encouraging people that are unaffiliated, non-affiliated, that they need to declare a party by the primary or they won't be allowed to vote. So those of you who are out and about in the community, make sure that you remind your friends that they need to declare a party if they want to let their voices be heard in the primary. And as you know, the party doesn't stick with you. After you vote, you can go back and you can become non-affiliated again. So especially if you have friends who have moved to the area, some people are maybe not familiar with how the primary system in Oregon works. So also talking about letters to the editor and articles in the paper, Dolores wrote a very good article to the bulletin. So thank you, Dolores. Susan Cobb also had a letter in the source. And Joette also had an article in the source. Not all of these were politically related, but it's nice to see that that we're out there making our voices be heard and educating people in a variety of ways. So Karen, I'm going to turn this over to you.
So our speakers today will be talking about Envision Bend. It's a visioning process that grew out of Bend 2030. First, we'll be hearing from the executive director, Laura Fritz. She began working for Envision Bend in late 2019. For more than 25 years, she's focused her career on building community, equity, vitality, and livability. As the principal of Fritz Consulting, a nonprofit consulting firm serving Central Oregon, she has provided interim executive director and other leadership services. Laura has volunteered for numerous Central Oregon nonprofit organizations and served on the City of Bend Planning Commission. She's an enthusiastic athlete and outdoor lover. Laura loves to ski, bike, and hike with her family and friends and her French Bulldog Moose. Thanks to Laura, we also have Jillian Taylor here. Jillian is the principal and business strategist of Jillian Taylor Consulting. She also leads clients through a complex process to identify strategic priorities and guides them to implement complex initiatives. Jillian is passionate about community visioning and planning, and immediately upon moving to Central Oregon, reached out to join the Bend 2030 board, which is now Envision Bend. She served as board chair and interim executive director before transitioning back to full-time consulting work. Jillian has served on numerous local boards and committees, and her clients include the City Club of Central Oregon, Housing Works, Family Kitchen, and Oregon Adaptive Sports. For fun, Jillian loves to watch action movies. Please welcome Laura Fritz and Jillian Taylor.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Yes, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm very excited to have this opportunity. I have to admit that the thing I'm the most nervous about is the technological aspect and making sure that it works. So let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint with you as we get started here. Let's see. Okay, one thing I wasn't sure about is whether or not I'd be able to see everybody. And I, of course, cannot see everyone because of the slideshow presented. So I'm going to be the primary making the presentation. I'm going to ask Jillian to kind of interrupt me if there are some hands or issues that I've missed that she wants to chime in on, but Jillian will also be available for question and answers at the end of of this presentation. But as mentioned in the introduction, I am, oops, excuse me, it's not moving forward.
Yeah, and Laura, just so you don't have to worry about the questions in chat, I will read those to you and Jillian as they pop up.
Ah, okay, great.
But after your presentation.
Terrific, thank you. Yeah, it's really hard to manage the chat, so I appreciate that. But I'm super excited to be here. This is the first really big presentation that we are doing about the community visioning project that is being managed by Envision Bend. And so this is our inaugural presentation since launching the project in December. Jillian is part of the consulting firm that we hired to help us with this project. And so I asked Jillian to attend in case we have some specific questions about the process itself and the real nitty-gritty, where she's more of an expert than I am. And so if you have any curiosities as we go along, Jillian or I may be the ones who can answer those questions. So thank you for having us. Let's get right into it. I want to tell you a little bit about what I'll be discussing today. I'd like to give you a little bit of background about our organization and a short history of what we've done during our 16-year existence. Some of you may know us as Bend 2030. We were formerly Bend 2030 and we rebranded in 2021. The number itself kind of puts a date stamp or a shelf life on us. And so we really felt like it was time to look more to the future and change our name and have a fresh new look. So we are now Envision Bend. I'll talk to you a little bit about what we're doing today and really dive into the community visioning project that we are working on for the next year plus. I'll also discuss with you the outcomes from the project that we can expect, and then a bit of a call to action to you all as a group once we finish up. So Envision Bend really has been a community convener and champion of our community vision since our inception. Our mission is to bring diverse stakeholders together to educate, engage, and empower all members of the Bend community to have a voice in our city's future. And our role is to basically serve as the steward and champion of our community's vision and work to ensure that the vision remains vibrant, relevant, and strategic. And we do that in a number of ways. We convene the community periodically to revise and refresh the vision. That's where what we're working on right now. We also assemble diverse community stakeholders to advance initiatives and ideas that are grounded in our vision. And we welcome and engage the community in a nonpartisan, inclusive manner to promote a healthy and livable city for all. I always like to share with people who the current board of directors of the organization is. These are the people who volunteer their time to govern the organization, to oversee it, to make sure we're executing our mission and living up to why we were created as a nonprofit organization. We have 11 board members right now. We tend to keep our board in the 11 to 13 size range. That's a really kind of a magical number as far as I'm concerned, in terms of really having enough people to help with the work while also being able to have the level of engagement that you want on a board. And many of you, I imagine, know some of these folks. We do take a lot of pride in trying to have a very diverse board of directors. We're strategic about how we recruit board members, and we try to ensure as much diversity as possible so that we make really good decisions as a group. We not only screen for skills and expertise for our board, but we also like to look for people with different life experiences, different demographic characteristics such as gender and race and ethnicity. We look at, we've tried to have a mix of renters and owners, a mix of people who live in different parts of our community as well. All those contribute to having a great deal of perspective at the table as we work as a body. Of course, we're always working to increase our diversity as well. It's an ongoing process. So I'm going to jump into our a bit of history about Bend 2030 and Envision Bend. And I've really condensed it quite a bit because I'd like to take the majority of our time to discuss the visioning project. But I think that providing this context is really important for understanding what we're doing with the visioning project right now. So back in 2005, 2006, wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people on this phone call actually are familiar with the original vision and action plan project that was actually led by the city of Bend. It was not led by a nonprofit or organization. It was led by the city. And the project was actually called Bend 2030, a community visioning project by and for the people of Bend, Oregon. It was a big community engagement process over the course of a year and a half, I believe, or maybe a year. And it resulted in a final vision statement that was adopted by the city and other institutions and organizations in Bend that had 6 focus areas. And I'm just going to share the focus areas because I think it gives you kind of a concept of what a vision statement covers. Those focus areas in our original vision were a well-planned city, a vibrant economy, a quality environment, safe, healthy people, a strong community, and a creative learning culture. So in addition to having a vision statement with those 6 focus areas, we also in that process produced a 5-year vision action plan. And that's really like the work plan to guide our efforts to make that vision a reality. So those were the 2 deliverables at the end of that community engagement process. So that particular visioning process was very successful. It was estimated that 1 in 4 adults in our community participated in that process. There were lots of engagement and participation, and there was a lot of energy around the vision. And as a result, many participants wanted to make sure that the vision did not just become this plan that sat on a shelf. And so energy was put into forming a nonprofit organization to serve as kind of the champion and shepherd of that vision and make sure it became a reality. And that's how the nonprofit Bend 2030 was incorporated. We were incorporated as a 501c3 in 2007. And then for the next 5 years, we really worked with lead partners to implement that vision. And it was estimated that by the end of 2011, at least 85% of the first action plan items were either implemented or underway. Let's see, keep moving. as a result of that, because we'd made so much progress through that first 5-year action plan, in 2012, Bend 2030 launched Accelerate Bend, which was a streamlined effort to, in public engagement, to renew and update the 2030 vision. In other words, another action plan for how we continue working towards that vision. Accelerate Bend led to the identification of new initiatives that the community wanted to address. Some of those new initiatives were the Central Area Plan, a new recreation complex, which ultimately became the Pavilion down there on Simpson Avenue. And another example of efforts that came out of that Accelerate Bend process was new links between higher education, innovation, and enterprise, which is manifested through OSU Cascades Innovation Co-Lab. From 2014 to 2018, we as an organization were really focused on the Accelerate Bend initiatives and also just addressing special projects of critical concern to our community. We were very involved in putting together and leading a workforce housing group that developed a number of policy recommendations to the city to try to make it easier for our community to have more ability to develop workforce housing. I think 11 of the 12 policy recommendations that the group we formed were adopted by the city of Bend. We were involved very closely with City Club. I think Bend 2030 and City Club partnered to lead conversations about the Bend City Charter and the form of government and how we elected our representatives, which ultimately led to the mayoral election process that we now have. We spent a lot of time on transportation issues, and a lot of that work went into what ultimately led to the passage of the transportation bond in 2020. And we also held, we put together a civic equity project where we gathered a cohort of neighborhood association leaders and nonprofit leaders to help develop and hone skills for advocating for the needs of their constituents. So those are just some of the examples of ways that Bend 2030 and now Envision Bend has worked towards advancing the vision and addressing the critical issues in our community. From that point, you may be asking, okay, well, so that takes us up to 2018. And what has Envision Bend been doing since then? And we have continued to work with government, with businesses and community groups, and really people of all backgrounds and perspectives across Bend to help shape our future. And around 2019, we realized that our vision was outdated, and that in order to work on behalf of our community to shape our future, we really needed to have a vision that reflect our current community needs and conditions. So by 2019, we spent a lot of time working to build up some consensus around the need for a new vision for the Bend area, understanding that our community really has come to a crossroads. And we got a lot of support for revising and refreshing and updating that vision in 2019. And so by 2020, Envision Bend was ready to launch a new vision update. And then in March of 2020, the global pandemic hit. So I'm gonna take a moment just to pause there and back up a little bit, and we'll get to recent history issues and how we've moved forward in a second. But I wanted to address like why we thought a new vision was needed and why now. And really, we have felt this way, and many community leaders have joined us in believing that this is a really important project for the greater Bend area. Anybody who has lived in Bend for the last 10 years or even less know that our community has changed pretty dramatically in the last 16 years since we conducted that first visioning project. We have doubled in size since 2005, 2006. And Bend really has been a growth magnet. We've changed from a big town to a small city. You know, we have had growing pains as communities do when they change so much. And so we're facing emerging issues as a growing community, but also continuing issues. Those include housing affordability. They include climate change. They include community resiliency, social equity, and so on. A lot of issues have emerged and continue for us as a community. The global pandemic also has accelerated societal change, and we've all had a very new and different and difficult experience as a community that shapes our perspective going forward. So what we've found really since 2019, but even more so today, having been through the social isolation of the global pandemic, is that Bend area residents truly hunger for genuine dialogue on our community's future. All right, trying to advance the slide. There we go. So what is a community vision and why is it important? Essentially, it is a community vision is a plan that describes our desired destiny as a city or a community. It really serves as our North Star of where we want to be in 10, 20, or 30 years as a community. It essentially is a plan about our desired future. We like to say you shouldn't leave your future to chance. Many of you have probably heard the saying that a plan is like a roadmap. And if you don't have a plan, you'll end up somewhere, but it's probably not where you want to be. And so we really think of the vision as that kind of a plan for our community. What comes out of a vision is the identification of community values, which then help frame the actual vision project and conversations. There's a deep level of collaboration and consensus building through the development of a community vision. And then lastly, I'd like to say that community visioning really does work. Not all in fact, I think most communities perhaps don't do this. We can have Jillian weigh in on that and the question answer if you're curious about it, but not all communities do visioning work, but it really truly does work to help bring partners together to drive towards mutually agreed upon destiny that we want as a community. So I think the next thing I'll do is really dive into the community visioning project that we're undertaking right now and describe to you the actual process and the outcomes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So as I mentioned when we started, the timeline for the project, it's already begun. We officially launched and signed our contract with our consultants in December of 2021, and the project will run through March 2023. The reach of the project is on the Greater Bend area, and we just define Greater Bend as meaning, of course, the city of Bend proper, as well as outlying areas whose residents relate to or participate in the life of the city on a regular basis. And we very intentionally created this open definition to make room for more inclusive and purposeful conversations that will allow us to engage with regional entities whose purview extends beyond the city of Bend borders. I like to use myself as an example too. I consider myself a Bend resident, and technically I live outside the city proper borders, but I still consider myself a Bend resident and always have. So we want to include those voices that interact with the city on a very regular basis. The emphasis of the whole project is inclusion, it's dialogue, visionary thinking, and consensus building. We have, our project is set up to kind of be implemented in 5 phases. I'm going to take you through those phases in a moment and describe the general activities that will be occurring throughout the year. But there will be engagement throughout the whole process. There's engagement in every phase of this work. And the final result of all of our efforts will be a whole of community, nonpartisan conversation, which we believe is a real investment in the well-being of our entire community. So here is our process map. This is a visual that helps capture in a visual way how the project unfolds. I apologize that it's not very clear in this format, but don't worry, I'm going to take you through each of the various phases individually, and that's a little more visible. So during phase 1 of the project, we will be, that runs from December 2021 through March 2022. We call this framing the process. So a lot of research and background work we need to do to build the foundation for this project. And so it is a bit of behind the scenes work to some extent, but it's really necessary to set up our work going forward to be successful. So during this phase, we'll establish a framework and conduct research for the visioning process, including stakeholder and community leader interviews, information on existing plans and policies, and an analysis of emerging trends for our community. Phase 2, which is called Setting the Stage, runs from February through April 2022. And during this phase, we'll facilitate community listening sessions across the city. We'll establish shared community values that we hear through those listening sessions and interviews that we've conducted. And we'll conduct extensive outreach to promote a comprehensive community dialogue. Phase 3, this is kind of the most visible phase, front-facing part of the community visioning project. It's called Creating the Vision, and it'll run from April through August of 2022. This is where we will have in-depth community conversations. We'll have major visioning events, workshops, we'll have an online survey, and it'll result in a new community vision and draft strategies to achieve it. From September through December of 2022, we'll enter into phase 4 of the project, and this is actually developing the plan. This is where we form a citizen action team who will work together on all the information that's been collected through the community engagement work to develop the action plan, that 5-year action plan that I described on the first vision project, we will also have for this vision project. That action plan will include key strategies, plan partners, and success measures. The plan will include a short list of signature projects. Those are big community efforts that will require a lot of collaboration and a lot of participants to achieve, as well as a personal actions plan. We'd like to make sure that we can take this big community vision down to the individual action level so that people can relate to the vision in their personal lives and work towards achieving it in their personal actions. And then the final phase of the project is from January through March of 2023. This is launching the plan. This is where we launch the plan implementation. We produce and share the final plan document. We promote and support implementation activities by our plan partners. That's where our convener role really comes into play. And then as an organization, we will also monitor implementation and progress over time. So major project outcomes include core community values statements. I mentioned that through listening sessions, we'll be able to identify some consensus around core community values that will help frame the conversations and the process of the vision project. We will have that long-term community vision statement with focus areas where our community really wants to be very intentional about what we address and how we shape our community. And we'll also have that near-term vision action plan. It's typically a 5-year action plan that includes specific actions, signature projects, identified plan partners, success measures, and those ideas for personal action. So there are many other activities and outcomes as a result of this project. Just the process itself is very much a community building effort. But there are some other actual takeaways that are tangible and perhaps less tangible that I wanted to highlight. First of all, we'll be able to provide an analysis of key trends and strategic issues that are affecting the Greater Bend area. We also will conduct very robust and intentional outreach to underrepresented communities. And when I say underrepresented communities, I mean both the traditionally marginalized communities, people of color who often don't have a seat at the table or historically have not had a seat at the table, as well as those communities that often choose not to get involved in these kind of processes or attend community meetings or what have you. We are working very diligently and very intentionally with community partners, local community partners, as well as an outfit called Oregon's Kitchen Table, which is out of Portland State University, which is an organization that really has a lot of expertise in making sure that we can bring all voices to the table to affect policy decisions in the state of Oregon. And perhaps some of you are familiar with Oregon's Kitchen Table, but they are working with us to help us design and even implement some of our community outreach so that we ensure that we get as many voices to the table to contribute to this process as possible. And I just wanted to highlight that some of the different kinds of outreach that we're conducting will be, it will be very diverse because we want to try to reach people in a lot of different ways rather than just asking people to come to a night meeting at the Tower Theater, which is not accessible to everybody. Although that perhaps is one of the strategies we will use, pandemic allowing, but we will have listening sessions that likely will be virtual. So we can meet people where they are. We will have individual interviews and workshops and a survey, as well as those kind of larger community meetings. Oh, wow. I guess I have kind of gotten through my presentation. I want to just wrap it up by saying that you know, we really want to invite the League of Women's Voters to help us plan our brightest future together. We believe that the time is now to chart the future for our community. We are at a crossroads. We've had a lot of growth, particularly during the pandemic. We're really struggling with a lot of issues that impact quality of life in this community that we love. And we really want to invite the League of Women Voters to participate in this process and also to encourage the rest of our community to contribute to it, because we really need to be able to amplify all voices to be heard so that we can preserve the things we love about our community and then tackle those issues that potentially can diminish our quality of life. So thank you so much for allowing me to, oops, here we go, make this presentation to you. I'm now at the point where I think I'll go ahead and stop sharing so that I can see people better. There we go.
Laura, we have a lot of questions rolling in, but the
Okay.
first one is a compliment, so I'll start with that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
From Annis, she says 2030 was a fantastically engaged visioning process. The multitude of subgroups were why I think it was successful. May your renewed effort do likewise. Good luck.
Why, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And hearing people's experiences to help remind us of what we need to really make sure we build in as we move forward.
Okay. Here's a question from Becky Powell. Which action items and policy recommendations are not going forward and why? I assume this was from Bend 2030.
Can I get a little bit of clarification from Becky?
Becky, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Hi, yeah, she mentioned that 85% of the action items were undertaken in the very early time, and then they had some policy recommendations, but not all those were going forward. And I wondered if there was some sort of theme there, that things that didn't happen.
I can maybe speak a little bit to that, Laura, if you'd like. Okay. Hi, Becky. So first of all, that all was before Laura and my time here in the community, but I've done a fair amount of research into that. For example, the work that we did around bringing together and convening folks around the housing affordability, there were 11, I believe, policy recommendations that were made to the city of Bend to allow for, more for things to pencil out for developers. And I believe 10 of the 11 went forward, and the other one was kind of tabled because it conflicted with some other work that they were doing. A few years back, when we really were looking at the original vision and how much had changed and what had been accomplished, et cetera, one thing that stood out to me that was in the original vision and really hasn't gotten much traction, not that there's not interest in it, is a performing arts center or a part of the community that is really centered around the arts. I know there's been, various groups that have tried to, take that on. I am not going to be surprised at all if that is still in our next version of the vision, for example. The other thing that kind of put a wrench in things is, so the vision was done in 2006, the organization formed in 2007, and then if you recall, 2008 was, the recession, and kind of everyone was back on their heels trying to figure out what to do. So I believe that there was some momentum that was lost on some of those projects and some that became less imperative. So I think that's the best I can respond to that.
Thanks, Jillian. That's helpful. Jillian has more historical perspective. I would also just add to that the vision often, we dream about our future and what we want for our community, but in order for things to move forward, we do have to have partners who do that. Envision Bend is not so much an implementing body as a convener and facilitator and supporter. Occasionally we have run programs ourselves, but our role has really been to try to help bring together the partners who can make some of these projects happen. And so if we don't have partners who are willing to step up and do that, that might explain, some of that as well.
Laura, at one point in your slideshow, you mentioned community resiliency, and Kim Scott was wanting to hear more about what you meant by community resiliency.
So community resiliency really probably is a cross-cutting theme that we anticipate we will come across during this visioning process. It could mean climate resiliency. It could mean public health resiliency. It could mean economic resiliency. I think we have a bit of a new perspective on resiliency as something that impacts so many aspects of our life because of what we are going through with this global health crisis. And so I'm going to kind of kick it a little bit to Jillian to talk about this idea of resiliency and how it might play into a cross-cutting theme. I do want to remind you that the community vision is defined and created by the community, and yet we have conversations with people all the time. You have conversations with people all the time. We can anticipate some of the things we expect to hear quite a bit about during this process, and resiliency is indeed one of those things. So Jillian, can you kind of add to that?
Sure. Yeah. I know it's kind of a fuzzy term, but I think of it as, our lives, our world, our environment, our businesses have become so much less stable and predictable that we need to be a little bit more agile and be positioned to respond to events or things that change. And I do think it cuts across a lot of different areas, everything from, I'm sure we've all heard of the Cascadia event and what would the potential impact on our community be? How would we respond? I don't know that any of us predicted the pandemic. Maybe we did, but that's a good example. But it could even be things like scenario planning. We don't have a lot of redundancy in our infrastructure, say like broadband. And so that actually keeps some businesses from moving here, because if we were to have a failure, we may not have the backup, the redundancy that we need. So those are a couple of examples. It's really about thinking through possibilities and how can we create an agile community that is equipped to respond as best as we can to whatever unknown thing comes across our plates.
Okay, Laura, the next questions are mainly organizational. Could you speak about the organization? For example, are you a 401c4? What is your budget? Funding sources, membership, staff, location, and relationship with the city of Bend. So it's a lot of questions rolled into one.
Okay. No, I appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about really how we're set up and what we do, and how we collaborate with the community. So that's a great question. I appreciate it. We are a 501c3 organization. Our annual operating budget is pretty lean and mean. We have our budget is about $80,000 a year. We also have a budget for this project, and this project is about $250,000. If you included salary, it's closer to $300,000, but we kind of have separated those two things. So the project itself is we have such extensive community engagement and research, and so we are raising money to implement this project. We have received a commitment from the city of Bend at this point for $50,000 to support the project, and it's for a certain scope, completing a portion of the scope of this project, and we report back to the city bi-monthly on our progress with that scope of work for the project. But we do hope, and we're hopeful, I will say, and that the city of Bend ultimately will pay for half the cost of this project. We'll be going back to them in June to request more funds once we've shown the progress that we've made on the first part of it. And the rationale for our approach to this is that, of course, the city of Bend itself is going to benefit greatly from the work that we're doing. They will be the body that will probably benefit the most technically from the results of this project. However, we really, really believe that this project needs to be community-led and community-driven. And when a project is led by a governmental entity, there's a whole new kind of layer of, okay, what's this all about? There is no one specific agenda that should be driving this project. It should be community-led and the voice of our community. And so we just believe that this needs to be run by a nonpartisan objective nonprofit organization that's working on behalf of the community. And so that's why we committed to raising the remainder of the funds to make the project happen. We are very actively involved in fundraising right now. And I know this is not a fundraising event, but I'm just putting it out there. If you have any interest, feel free to contact me. And we hope to have a pretty diverse set of, frankly, investors. We're calling it an investment opportunity into the well-being of our community, because that then represents, well, what we're trying to accomplish as an organization. Let's see, I can see that question, relationship with the City of Bend. So I will mention our funding structure. We are a nonprofit organization. We have to raise money for our operations and our programs. And so our funding model is we have organizations and institutions in our community who believe in our mission, and they provide us funding that serves as our operating funding with no strings attached. Those funders are called our Leadership Alliance, and we depend on them for their funding, of course, but we also use our Leadership Alliance kind of like a think tank to kind of stress test ideas and bounce ideas off of them. You'll notice that there are a lot of organizations that are familiar names: Brooks Resources, the City of Bend, Bend Park and Recreation District. It's quite, there are about, I think, 15 different organizations. The Tower Theater is one, Mount Bachelor, and we use this group as, kind of sounding board, idea board, but they are not our board of directors. So they do not have a governing role whatsoever or an agenda setting role for our organization. So that is how we exist as an organization these days. We also get individual donations as well, but that's a very small part of our budget.
Okay. And I noticed that Carrie Podell posted a link to Envision Bend along with the timelines. So I will be sure to include that in our upcoming Echoes newsletter.
Karen, I just also posted in chat, sorry, a link to our Leadership Alliance. It has all their logos so that folks can see who's supporting us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Kim Scott has asked, what subject have you had the most difficult time getting consensus on?
So that's a difficult question, because we really for the last couple of years have been working to try to get the visioning project off the ground. Frankly, we lost almost a full year when the pandemic hit, because we knew the moment the world shut down because of the health crisis that we could not go out into the community saying, hey, let's all do a visioning project about our long-term future, when people were really focused on urgent issues like, how do I keep my business open? How do I educate my children, et cetera? So we as an organization had to take a step back and lie low, because that was not the time for us to start this project. I think I said in my presentation that I do think that the silver lining to having to delay the project is that we have different perspectives today than we would have back if we'd done this vision pre-pandemic. And I think it will have an impact on the final vision that we create as a community. But we have not been taking any positions at this point on issues in our community, simply because we don't feel like we have a current vision upon which we should really be basing those things. However, just being involved in the community as we are, I know that the issues that are coming up the most when we talk to members of our community are housing, affordability, that's huge, environmental crises, the fires, and the climate, the role of climate change in our environmental challenges. Jillian, do you
Yeah.
want to add a couple to that? I mean, resiliency truly is one of those two, but I think, as I said before, that runs through a lot of different topics.
What's the question about the most challenging issues? Well, I can speak to, the past a little bit, which kind of caught me by surprise when I was involved in this, is kind of the build up to the transportation bond. And Bend 2030 at the time was really trying to build, consensus, not consensus, but at least get folks talking to each other. And at the time I was, I think, board chair for Bend 2030. And the divide, that spectrum of perspectives from we should have more trails, biking, safety lanes, et cetera, to please don't take away my car, was so vast, and people were so passionate about it that it took a lot of work. We, Bend 2030 at the time, formed the Move Bend Coalition, which was everyone from Mount Bachelor to ODOT to commute options, and just to get folks talking with each other and to realize how much overlap there is in needs and wants. To get all the way through, we certainly, weren't part of passing the transportation bond, but we did a lot of the pre-work. And I'll share one quick scenario that I personally presented our work to all three Rotary groups, who I really respect and appreciate their role in our community. And they honed in on the transportation and the energy and concern around having, cars taken away or not being able to drive where folks wanted. I was kind of surprised at the energy and passion that was behind that sentiment. So I'm so pleased that the community came together to pass that bond, which I think is a good hybrid of all the different perspectives.
Okay. Earlier, when we talked about resiliency, Jillian mentioned Bend Broadband, and there's a question about Bend Broadband. They've been a less than resilient provider of broadband for this area. How can we make them step up to serve this community's needs?
Good question. I don't know the technical aspects of that. It is an issue, has been for a long time. And if that emerges out of the vision, I could see that being a signature project where we really dive into what would it take to increase that reliability and create some redundancy and resiliency in it. I don't know how to do that right now. If anyone else does, send me a note.
Okay. And I know the answer to this question from your website. Anastas is the Latino Community Association among the Leadership Alliance. I know that they are not, but they are, the Latinx community is one of the larger demographic groups. They're about 8% of the population here in Bend and Deschutes County. And I was wondering how you're planning on including that demographic in your visioning process.
Laura, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, would you like me to take that one? I'm happy to. Yeah, great. So we consider the Latino Community Association a partner. I have spoken to Brad Porterfield about this project already, and we hope to work with the Latino Community Association in some of our outreach, working with them as liaisons and potentially facilitators for meetings with the Spanish-speaking community. And, they are a very important group for us to work with to ensure that we engage our full community. And so we already have connections with them. They've worked with our organization on a number of different things in the past. So while they're not a part of the Leadership Alliance, they are definitely considered a key partner to our organization, and we have a great working relationship. We are trying to also expand our relationships and partnerships to other groups, because we've seen a lot of new organizations form during the pandemic in response to community needs. And so we are working with people at the Sheriff's Department who were instrumental in developing COVID response efforts to find out what organizations are out there that we should also be in touch with that reach communities that are harder to reach. So,
I would just add where we're at right now in phase 1 is we're kind of expanding the circle beyond the Leadership Alliance. And we've identified around 15 key partners that we really want to engage with throughout this visioning work. And LCA is on that list for sure, along with, we've been referred to the Fathers Group, we've got Ben Lapine Schools, we've got, the Central Oregon Disability Support Network. It's pretty broad, and we're trying to expand that next level of engagement.
Okay, thank you.
I see Molly has a question. Is that right? I don't want to jump in, Karen.
Yeah, Molly, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a couple of things. I'll start off with saying, and I was the one that asked the question about Ben Broadband, and you asked, is there anything that we could do to speed them along in terms of helping us get into the 21st century? One of the participants on this call, Susan Ackerman, does have a really good comment I think is relevant to that conversation, and I'll let her pop in if she wants to after I'm done asking another question. You'll notice that earlier in the chat I had said that this coming February 17th, or I'm not sure what the date is, City Club is having a conversation again about the Oregon Child Care Desert. The reason I bring that up is because women are disproportionately hurt by this pandemic. We've lost jobs. We've been relegated to staying home for homeschooling and for Zoom schooling, et cetera, far more than the men have. And as a result, it's really, really hurt the economy of this entire area. And our childcare desert is not unique to just this area. It's going on absolutely everywhere in the United States. There is a movement afoot right now. And I'm sure that Envision Bend has been very involved in looking at this childcare desert and what some of the options are. So all I'm suggesting is that all of us League of Women Voters, if we wanted to, either in person or on Zoom, can attend the next City Club meeting on this subject and get some background on it. When solutions start coming forward, I hope that the League is involved in some of those solutions. And it's a big, big deal, especially for women. Although I will say to our guests, men are also members of League of Women Voters. Having said all that, I'll pass it on to Susan Ackerman if she wants to say anything at all about Ben Broadband. And if not, that's fine too.
Susan, did you have something you wanted to say, a comment?
I don't know that I have much more to say other than what I put in the comments, but Ben Broadband has always really feared getting the State Public Utility Commission involved in their business model. And it's not something that is easy or automatic because of the difference between state regulation and federal regulation. But having lots of communications with Ben Broadband about the service issues and then data collection, and then having those communications with the Public Utility Commission could be the kind of thing that would get their attention. It might not work, but that's one strategy with Ben Broadband. I mean, the availability of broadband for everybody in rural areas, and that would mean a lot of the eastern part of Oregon, maybe even Bend area, is an important public policy issue and something to be brought to the attention of regulators and the state legislature. So that's just my comment.
Okay. And along with your comment, there's a comment from Karen Zacharias saying competition is the best way to get Ben Broadband to step up. So in addition to what you're mentioning about public utility issues. Becky Powell has another comment. Wi-Fi is not available in much of Eastern Oregon. Our hub is in Portland and very vulnerable to CSZ. Ben could spearhead a line from the east to serve Eastern and Central Oregon and provide reliable service. So that sounds like great suggestion for the visioning process. Susan Ackerman, I think you just spoke to this. Greg Heacock, public access was an original component of broadband service that was dropped but dearly missed. Training community members and students to develop programs and programming would be one way to engage the community. I don't know if Laura or Jillian would like to comment on that.
Karen, may we get a copy of the chat?
I
There's some
will save the
ideas.
chat and I can send it to you. You can
That would
also
be great.
save the chat by going to the very bottom message of the chat, looking at the 3 dots, the ellipsis.
Ah,
And
okay.
then the
I can
first option
download
would
it.
be
so-
to save the chat there. Karen Zacharias also commented that Biden's infrastructure deal reportedly provided money for better broadband.
Great.
Yeah, and if I could just make a general comment, I love that you guys jump right to solutions and ideas. I'm already nominating you for the action team that's going to deal with broadband redundancy. But part of what we as Envision Bend and the next consulting team have to do right now is kind of rise above and get a lay of the land of what is already being done by who, and we don't want to overstep or do things that are already in the works. So Molly, to your point, Katie Brooks at the Chamber has driven an initiative around childcare, and there are a number of entities that are really focused on that need right now. We need to make sure we're in touch with that. And then what I imagine is once we kind of get the lay of the land, we will see where there's gaps and where maybe we need to connect some folks or we need to take the leadership role of addressing those topics.
And I don't see any questions in chat at the moment, so I have a question. From your website, I see that there was a collaborative housing work group in 2017 that talked a lot about middle housing. Since that time, the population of people who are houseless has grown every year. What will Envision Bend be doing to hear more from these community members about their challenges and ideas?
Great question. Jillian mentioned that we're developing key partner lists, and we are reaching out to organizations that serve the houseless to work with them to find ways to gather that input. There are a lot, this is not an easy community to get feedback from. And so through these partnerships, we hope to find vehicles for getting that input. And also talking to leaders of the organizations who are on the front lines and are working on solutions and understand what works and what doesn't. One of the neighbor impact. I'm seeing Carrie Podell in the audience, and she and I used to work for Neighbor Impact back in the day. So hello. That's an example of there are resources in our community that we need to tap into. And kind of to reiterate Jillian's point, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to start from scratch when we don't have to. We want to bring all those resources together to the fore and figure out how we can add value.
Okay.
And Karen, I'll just add to that, when we were doing that housing affordability project, the focus was on middle market, meaning, the teachers, the folks that work in the service industry, everyone that, is not in the technical affordable need and yet maybe can't afford a reasonable home here. And there's a lot of energy right now, and rightly so, on the houseless or homeless group. And unfortunately, a number of those folks that were in the middle market have now been pushed to houselessness. But I do think that there's still a lot of room to look at folks in that middle market, realm, and not to overlook them. So I could see out of our visioning work, we'll find out who's doing what and if there is still a need to focus on that.
Yeah, that's one of those themes that if I had to guess, the housing issues will be one of the major themes that come out of this, because it's impacting people's lives, so many people's lives in our community.
And that looks at things like duplexes, townhomes, density, parking, requirements, zoning. All of that plays into whether or not developers can, make any profit off that.
Okay.
I would like to offer my contact information if anybody would like additional information. So I'm going to type it into the chat. Oops, I got to make sure it goes to everybody. And I would like anybody to reach out to me if they have questions or comments.
Yeah, that was actually my last question. Your talk has generated a lot of interest, and if people are interested in participating in any of the groups that you'll be having at the Tower Theater or on Zoom, how do they go about finding out about that? And I see just contact you, it sounds like.
Yeah, and we will also try to have a lot of publicity in a variety of media platforms when events and activities are occurring, so that people will be aware of it as well.
Okay. So we are now at 1 o'clock. Let me see, I see something else. Oh, this is from Annette Christensen. FYI to all, the State League of Women Voters is conducting a restudy of its 1985 child care study. County leagues are assisting by surveying a sample of child care facilities in our county. A task force is currently working on, just a second, scrolling. Conducting the survey in Deschutes County. If anyone has a connection with a particular child care facility that you believe should be included in our survey, please tell me who they are. Thanks, Annette Christensen, who is the task force chair.
Karen, could I just say one final comment?
Please do.
Okay. Thank you all so much for great questions and input. This feels like such a pivotal time in our community, and it would be easy to continue to splinter into different factions and points of view. And part of why we're so driven to do this right now is to elevate the conversation in our community, to find the values that we do share, and to bring people out of kind of retreating to their own perspective and starting to engage with what kind of future do we want for this community. And that's so important right now. I hope all of you are engaged in that conversation in some way.
Thank you, Jillian.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely a very valuable process. And as you can see, this is your first talk and it's generated an hour's worth of, or half an hour worth of questions and a lot of ideas and opinions. So thank you for convening this process, spearheading the process, and bringing people together to talk about their ideas about what the future of Bend and the surrounding area can look like. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Next month, we will be having Jerry O'Brien from the Bulletin and Emily Curitan from OPB. And as I mentioned earlier, one of our members, Joette Storm, has a very extensive journalism background, and she will actually be facilitating that meeting. We will be talking at the board meeting next week about whether that particular first Thursday will be on Zoom or whether we'll be able to be in person at the university or the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship like we had originally planned for January. But again, we had a little bit of a delay again with the twists and turns of the pandemic and Omicron coming onto the horizon. But thank you all for being there. We really appreciate both Laura and Jillian and all the members for their questions. Please join us next month if you're interested.